Linebacker, Michael Barrett's gone. Junior Colson gone. Those guys were stout. Ernest Hausman, of course, a tremendous transfer from Nebraska 2 seasons ago that filled in capably and posted some strong tackle numbers. And people are impressed with the work at Maryland from Jasham Barham. And then, of course, he comes in to fill that other spot.
Yeah, so those are the two, right? Those are the guys that are coming in for Colson and Barrett. Seems like solid starters right off the bat. They were starters last year. Well, not last year, but Barham was last year, and Hausman the year before with Nebraska, and he was one of the top freshmen in the country that year at linebacker. And so Michigan feels very comfortable with where they're at with them. They also have some good depth behind them and next to them. Jaden Hood is a guy that people are really high on. I think Hood could really emerge this year. I also like Micah Pollard a lot. He might get a lot more blitz package opportunities. And then someone like Samaj Bridgman, a little bit more of a thumper, probably could come in. And Jimmy Rolder, another one. Rolder especially, we've seen Michigan try and get him on the field more and more. And he has played pretty well when he's been out there. So it's probably, to me, Hausman, Barham, and then Rolder's that third guy. And really, it's just going to depend on what packages they want to put out there with who they're gonna play, because they have some versatility at that position. But I think Barham and Hausman are both very good, and Michigan's very comfortable with who they've got there. Very solid starters coming in.
Let's go up front, Nelson. You said at the outset that even though the edge rushers attract us because they're coming off the edge and those are exciting plays and they disrupt the passing game and sack the quarterback and strip sacks and all that business, and of course the corners and the safeties and the speed guys, but interior defensive tackle, that's really the core of the defense. That's where it all starts. And that's the main reason why this defense, first and foremost, there are a lot of reasons it was so good. And so this should be of comfort to everyone. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, those guys are back. Rayshon Benny as the primary backup. All those guys return.
Yeah, Graham and Grant, you could make the argument that they were both better than Chris Jenkins last year, who was a really, really good defensive tackle. And you could make that argument. Now Michigan, they're both sophomores, brings them back as juniors. Another full offseason. This time they're the solid starters in front of Jenkins. And then you talked about Benny, who was pushing for playing time throughout the season in a rotational piece. And I think Benny could have a really good season as well in a depth spot. And so that's really important for Michigan, because obviously last year they had guys that they could rotate through because they were so deep at defensive tackle. And they're trying to get back to that depth. I think Benny is a great component there. Cameron Brandt, going to be a guy who is kind of a tweener, could maybe play some DN, D tackle, depends on the formation. And then there's a few other highly touted prospects or guys that they think could emerge. Ike Iwuna is one that I see as a guy who could really play pretty early in the season as a rotational piece. But you're right. Those two guys, Grant and Graham, you just can't deny probably the best. I think it's safe to say the best defensive tackle duo in the country. Two of the best defensive tackles alone in the country on the same team. And then one freshman that I think people should watch out for. And this is a guy who every time I watched him, looks really similar to me to Mason Graham, which is ironic considering they're going to be on the same team together. Is Owen Wafel, who is out of Ohio, and Wafel is, I think, a guy who could come in and play right away and get minutes right away like Graham did. He plays really well with leverage, and he's a strong guy, a similar build to Graham, in good hands. And so I think those things can transfer if he can get comfortable and get his feet wet this spring and in the fall practices. I really do think that Wafel is a guy who could emerge here coming up, and maybe by the spring game in about a month.
And Nelson, as you well know, as a football fan, sometimes the jaw-dropping type of plays come from guys doing things that we don't normally think of them doing. And I'm bringing up the Kenneth Grant play because even though that's not paramount to his job responsibility or why he was so good, to see him chase down, it was either Katron Allen or Nick Singleton, one of the primary Penn State running backs, gained a lot of attention and got him noticed by a lot of people to say, wow, that guy's that athletic as a D tackle.
Yeah, it's incredible. And we heard about it. I mean, it's one of those things that, when you're someone who isn't paying close attention to a program, you don't hear things about how actually kind of freaky some guys are as athletes. But Kenneth Grant was one of those dudes who immediately, when he came in, everyone was blown away by his speed and his strength. I mean, but the speed for the size is just incredible. And that's a guy who I think is probably a top 15 pick next year if he plays the way we're expecting him to be playing this year. He reminds me a lot of some of the guys that have come out of Georgia at defensive tackle in recent memory. And so, and those are and Alabama's really produced some great defensive tackles as well, first round caliber picks. And so I think that Grant is right there. Graham, I'm not sure about his draft, prospects, but I'm sure he's, a highly touted recruit. But when you get a guy who is that physically gifted as Grant is, and also just gets it, plays really well and really hard, it's, that's a dude who could wreak some havoc on just about any team. And he did it all year long last year.
So, Nelson, once we go to the outside, you got Jalen Harrell and Braden McGregor move on. Derek Moore's there, Josiah Stewart, the Coastal Carolina transfer from 2 years ago, who's had a nice run with the Wolverines for the last 2 years. They seem to be pretty well fortified on the end position.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a chance that they actually get more sacks out of their edge rushers this year. A little bit of some scheme changes, a little bit of different. Martindale and Makari Page actually talked about this recently, is that the defense to him so far has looked pretty different. Not maybe schematically, but what they're trying to do on a down-to-down basis and the mindset that they're approaching the game with. And Martindale said he thinks he's going to be way more aggressive than Jesse Minter or Mike McDonald who were both disciples of his. So I think there's some continuity, but there's going to be changes like with any coach, especially getting a veteran coach in. And I think there's a chance. Moore is a really, really talented pass rusher. That was one of the top pass rushers in the class. He came in a couple years ago, and now he's a junior and he has a chance to show out. Josiah Stewart comes in, and now he's a senior, and he really started to emerge last season, especially later in the year. But really talented guy as well. Had double-digit sacks 2 years ago with Coastal Carolina, and he flashed this past season, but I think he was adjusting and made that play against Alabama in the Rose Bowl to knock the defensive lineman back into Jalen Milroe on the final play of the game there to get that stop. But outside of those two guys who I think could be one of the best pass rush duos in the conference, Moore, who I'm really high on, Etta, and I mentioned Cameron Brandt, who is a rotational piece maybe at like a tweener spot, but Etta, highly rated recruit, also think he has a shot. But a guy that I feel really comfortable saying is going to contribute a lot and should be very good is TJ Guy. TJ Guy played some snaps last year, but that is a rotational piece as well on the outside. In Michigan, just like any team, but Michigan really likes to rotate their edge defenders, and you kind of need to keep those guys fresh. And I believe in that as a philosophy. So TJ Guy is someone who I think a little bit older who might contribute big time. Couple more, a freshman that I want to watch out for who I think is really talented if he can figure things out here in the offseason is Devin Baxter. Watched a lot of his tape this offseason. Not a super highly touted recruit. Very physically gifted, tall, long guy, strong guy. Played on both sides of the ball. Played some tight end, also obviously edge rusher. And I think if he can figure things out quickly, he's physically talented enough to get on the field early as well and make an impact. But that position, I think Michigan fans should be pretty comfortable with.